structural reforms have influenced positively the agricultural sector in Latin America. For example, if we look at the numbers of exports measured in terms of calories, we find that the exports in Latin America has increased 7.5 times since 1990s. On the other hand, imports have only increased 3.5 times since 1990s. Most of this has gone to Asia and Africa and Latin America, and to the same Latin America. And in the case of Europe and North America, the exports have remained constant at around 20%. Now, despite these positive results, there are two key issues that we need to look at it carefully. The first issue is the fact that the average productivity of the agricultural sector is still far below the levels of productivity faced by the US or other developed countries. An explanation to this is the fact that still there is significant inequality within the region. There are countries that have grown substantially, like the case of Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Paraguay, in the case of soybeans, and there are countries which have remained extremely lagged and with very low levels of productivity, like the ones of Central America. As a result, we have regions that face significant food surpluses and regions that are facing significant constraints to access to food. The second issue, which is important, is the fact that despite the growth of the agricultural sector, the rural areas still are facing significant levels of poverty and significant levels of inequality. Now, what this means, it means that for the 14 million of small farmers that are in Latin America, of which around 5 million have less than 2 hectares, they have not clearly benefited from the structural transformation. And there is a need to be able to develop new policies that will be more inclusive for them. Despite this, it's important also to mention that the region have implemented some policies like the conditional cash transfers, programs like the IFPRI program in Brazil, that basically have helped to reduce the poverty levels of the rural areas. But this is clearly not enough, and still significant reforms need to be done to be able to incorporate this enormous mass of smallholders into the economies of the region. Clearly, the major achievement of the reforms has been the inclusion of the production of the region to the world. One of the major structural reforms has been the increase of openness to markets and the capacity of countries to be able to export significantly products around the world. The case of Brazil, the case of Peru, the case of Chile, the case of Uruguay clearly show how we have increased significantly the exports of basic staples and also high-value commodities around the world. Brazil has become one of the biggest producers of soybeans, maize, corn to the world. Similarly, Argentina is one of the top exporters of soybeans and wheat, and the same happens with the case of Uruguay and Paraguay. So clearly there have been very positive results. On the other hand, there have been significant reforms on land titling, which have increased the capacity of farmers to have property rights, and which are increasing the capacity of them to create a market for land, which is extremely important, especially if we want to capture economies of scale, and if we want to improve the agriculture of large scale. In that sense, I think that the reforms have been successful, and there is a lot to learn from the cases of Peru, Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. Specifically in the case of Brazil, there is also a lot to learn from the programs that have targeted small farmers, although it's important to mention that a small farm in Brazil will be higher than the average that we will see in Asia and Africa. In Brazil, a small farm will be around 10 hectares, which is significantly higher. But despite this, Brazil implemented what we call the Plan Hambre Zero, Hunger Zero, which has been successful in linking producers to the markets, basically by linking what was supplied by the smallholders to what was needed to the government to supply the transfers and also to supply breakfast to the schools. So these type of mechanisms are also useful, and is something that we can learn to be able to create collaboration within the region and also to create South-South collaboration with Africa and Asia. I think that the main lessons that can be learned from the policies implemented is the role of the government. And the government has to clearly play a role to create the environment for attracting investment. That's essential. I think in Latin America, we have learned after several macroeconomic crises and after several crises in terms of public investment of the importance of creating an appropriate investment environment and to have clear rules of the game so that investors can come to the economy and invest in the economy. At the same time, it's important to mention that still there is a need to increase the efficiency in which public expenditure is being used, especially in the case of infrastructure. One role of the government is to create the necessary infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, electricity, water and sanitation. This is a crucial role that has not been too successful in Latin America, and is a role that we need to improve over time. So clearly there are lessons to be learned. Reduction of distortions, transparency in the policies, openness to markets, increase efficiency of markets and reducing market failures, like the credit market, access to more credit, have competitive access to fertilizers, minimize the presence of subsidies, and support prices and distortions. But there are also things that we need to improve, from which we can learn from other countries in Asia, like for example what is happening in the rural transformation in China in terms of investment of infrastructure. Latin America needs to significantly invest more in infrastructure. Access to roads will be a crucial mechanism through which we can link smallholders to markets. Also, there is a lot to learn from horizontal coordination and how to coordinate the small farmers. The only way that the small farmers can link to dynamic markets is by having economies of scale. And the only way we can provide them with economies of scale is by coordinating them better, through farmer associations, rural producer associations, or cooperatives. The important thing is that they coordinate their activities so they have more scale when they purchase inputs, and they also have more capacity to negotiate prices when they sell the produce. So it is important to understand that today is different than what happened during the Green Revolution. During the Green Revolution, small was beautiful. There were no need of economies of scale. But today, to be able to access dynamic markets, it is essential to have economies of scale. In that sense, the only way that we can link dynamic markets, smallholders to these dynamic markets, is to coordinate them horizontally. And also, of course, through contract farming arrangements, which will help to minimize the market failures and the missing markets.